I've built my brand new 1440p gaming PC, and this one is a bit of a powerhouse at Quad HD and maybe even 4K depending on the game and if I do a bit of tweaking with the settings. But without any more talking, let's get this PC upgraded, or I'll show you how I upgraded it because it's in its final form right now. Starting off with the brains of this PC and gone is the Ryzen 5 8600G, purely because it's got excellent onboard graphics but its CPU is a bit mid. Anyways, the Ryzen 5 7600 is going into that AM5 socket because it's a pretty decent CPU. It's an excellent 6-core 12-thread chip and it's actually one of the best value CPUs you can get on the new market right now, and it's one I highly recommend to budget gamers. It will pair well with GPUs which are sort of bordering on the high mid-range sort of level, like the 7800 XT and 7900 GRE, and if you want to get a Team Green GPU, it will pair well with like the 4070 and the 4070 Super, and of course the RTX 3080, but more on that in a bit. Unlike the 8600G, the Ryzen 5 7600 has 32 megabytes of L3 cache, which certainly helps out with its gaming performance, and it's also got a full 16x PCIe 5.0 interface, not one I'm going to use today because my graphics card is PCIe 4.0. For this build, I'll be needing some more power thanks to that RTX 3080, but good news because Seasonic sent out their brand new Vertex GX 850 watt power supply. It's a modular PSU featuring 80 plus gold efficiency, and the cables with it are great. They're really easy to route and cable manage, so that's always a positive. Also, by the way, if you've got an Nvidia RTX 40 series graphics card, you don't need to worry about adapters because this is a PCIe 5.0 power supply, which means it's got native support for the 12 volt high power connector, and there's two included with this power supply. But I'm going to be using a 30 series card, so I'm not going to be using that today because I have the RTX 3080 Founders Edition, which does have the 12 pin connector, but the 12 volt high power doesn't fit into it for some reason, so I'm going to have to be using power adapters today. But it's a good job I upgraded this power supply because the RTX 3080 is an absolute power hog. But that's fine though, because it consumes a lot of power but it gives you a lot of gaming performance in turn for that, because this graphics card is excellent at 1440p gaming, and I've even used it for 4K gaming on my LG OLED as well, and it was totally fine for that. Yes, you might have to enable DLSS on quality, which in a lot of games looks better than native, and you might have to tweak some settings as well, but to be honest, I'm okay with that. I'm not going to spend an extra amount of money for an RTX 4080 Super or something like that, where I could just tweak a few settings which you don't even realise in game anyway, and get decent performance. And aesthetically, I think the Founders Edition RTX 3080 looks absolutely brilliant in this PC. It matches well with the motherboard, and the black on it matches with the case as well, so I think this looks absolutely excellent. And finally, I got 32 gigabytes of DDR5 memory in this PC. KingBank sent out their SharpBlade DDR5 memory and they feature the Hynix A chip, so they're crazy fast at 6400 MHz, and they also have tight timings at CL32. But they also look as good as they perform as well, as they do feature addressable RGB, which is controllable with your motherboard's software. So you can control it in softwares like Asus AuraSync, Gigabyte RGB Fusion, MSI Mystic Light, depending on what your motherboard's manufacturer is. And at 6400 MHz, I thought I was going to be running into problems with the memory controller in the Ryzen 5 7600, but good news, XMP enabled with no issues at all. So it's running at 6400 MHz with CL32 with no issues. I've been playing quite a bit of games on this and running Cinebench as well, and I've run into totally no problems, no blue screens, no crashes, anything like that. So that leads me to believe that this is some of the best value DDR5 memory on the market right now. So shout out to KingBank for sending these over because they are excellent DIMMs. I will be long-term testing these modules in this gaming and testing PC as well, so I can get a gauge on what their long-term reliability is like, but to be honest, with those Hynix A chips, I suspect they're going to be fine. So it's time to see how well this PC plays games at 1080p, 1440p and 4K. I've tested using the latest NVIDIA Game Ready driver at the time of testing. I'll put it on the screen because I don't know off the top of my head. And resizable bar is enabled on the RTX 3080. So let's see how this gaming PC gets on. Jumping straight into the benchmarks with Cyberpunk 2077, and here, especially at 1440p and 1080p, the 3080 and the 7600 pairing is excellent. 1080p is good enough for just south of 100 FPS on average, and 1440p only drops that average down by 12 frames per second. 4K at Cyberpunk with the Ultra preset isn't that doable with the RTX 3080 with 38 frames per second on average, but you can always enable DLSS and get closer to the 1440p figure, so performance on Cyberpunk is pretty decent for the most part. Fortnite is going to be performing just fine at all resolutions, and it's good enough for a high refresh rate experience on the DirectX 12 API with the medium preset. So if you wanted to play Fortnite competitively, this CPU and GPU pairing is going to be perfectly fine. Testing newer higher end GPUs, or mid-range now, on Hogwarts Legacy has shown me how well optimised this game is in all fairness. Getting triple digits at 1080p and close to them at 1440p shows to me that this GPU-CPU pairing is totally fine. And 4K does drop below 60 FPS on average, but then again, you've got DLSS, so that isn't really that much of a problem, and you can always do some settings adjustments. God of War is up next, and on all three resolutions, the RTX 3080 and 7600 are going to be totally fine. You're going to be getting at least 60 FPS with everything maxed out at 4K, which is brilliant to hear, so no need for DLSS in God of War. Jedi Survivor is a pretty hard game to run, and even at 4K I noticed a few VRAM related issues with texture popping, so that's something to note right there. But 1440p and 1080p were totally fine with that average frame rate, and there were no issues related to the textures either, which is great to hear. But that 4K figure isn't particularly brilliant, but I do recommend enabling DLSS as it does look better than the native TAA implementation, so it's kind of free performance and the game looks better as well, so that's what I'd recommend at both 4K and 1440p. Spider-Man Remastered is an excellently optimised title, but at 1080p the 7600 is holding back the RTX 3080 as we see barely any improvement in performance going down to full HD. However, 4K is going to be performing totally fine with 90 frames per second on average, so there's no issues there at all. Switching to the RT result, and here is a bit of a mixed bag. Spider-Man ray tracing though is totally fine, as each resolution still got above 60 frames per second on average, so there's no problems there, and ray tracing does look quite good in Spider-Man, so I would probably recommend enabling it on a GPU like the 3080. Hogwarts Legacy does see frame rates drop quite significantly, especially at 1440p and 4K, so I'd probably recommend against enabling ray tracing in Hogwarts Legacy, but maybe you could enable DLSS and do some settings tweaking to sort of mitigate the performance loss. And Cyberpunk's ray tracing is a bloodbath for basically any GPU on the market, and that stays true today with basically unplayable frame rates at both 4K and 1440p in my opinion, and 1080p does see some, well, playable performance at 59 frames per second, but it isn't that ideal. I highly recommend, if you want to enable ray tracing in Cyberpunk 2077, tweaking some settings, because you can get a playable experience out of the RTX 3080. So then, I think it's fair to say that I'm very happy with the performance from this PC. It performs very well in the games that I want to play, and to be honest, most of the titles that I do actually play are getting on quite a bit now. I play games like Battlefield 1, Assassin's Creed Origins, mainly games from around the 2016 to 2018 era. So I think 4K gaming, for me especially, is going to be totally fine on this PC. But even then, in newer titles like Cyberpunk, even though Cyberpunk's almost 4 years old now, but then Jedi Survivor as well, if I were to enable DLSS and just tweak a few settings, I'd get at least 60 FPS on average which feels fine on a controller because I'll be playing on the LG OLED behind me. And even in the case of Jedi Survivor, DLSS looks a lot better than the very, let's say, poor implementation of TAA they've got in that game, so that's always a positive as well. But despite all that, 1440p is still the sweet spot for a gaming PC like this, especially with the 10GB of VRAM on the RTX 3080, where we did see a few issues today. But if I just were to put DLSS on at 4K, it wasn't a problem at all. And 1080p, the 7600 does slightly hold back the RTX 3080 in a few games, but that is something I was expecting, and if you're spending this much on a PC, I don't think 1080p is really going to be on your mind anyway, so. But performance aside, the aesthetics of this PC are actually some of the best I've ever done. I think everything complements each other quite well in there. Like the sort of the grey on the RTX 3080 like matches well with the motherboard, and the black matches well with the cooler and the rest of the case. I do think it's a very nice looking PC. The KingBank modules do kind of look out of place because they are white dims, but I'm not really that concerned by it. They still look very nice, and with the RGB you're not really going to notice them anyway, and I'll just leave them on the orange colour because that's my favourite colour. Would I change anything with this PC? Yeah, I probably would. I would probably change the graphics card, but for an aesthetic reason. I'd probably get a Founders Edition RTX 4080 or something like that, just so it looks a lot better, especially as I won't need the adapter, as the Vertex power supply does have PCIe 5.0 capabilities, so there is that. But other than that, maybe custom sleeved cables, and that would be it, to be honest, because the rest of this PC looks pretty brilliant. So this PC build performs quite well, and it also looks pretty great in my opinion as well. And in fact, it's going to be my new testing and gaming PC, so I'm going to get a lot of use out of this, as every single GPU you see tested on the channel is going to be tested in there, despite from a few which might require the 13700K, my editing workstation. But other than that, I'm going to be using this PC a lot. So with that being said, I want to say a massive thank you to both KingBank and Seasonic for sending out some parts for this PC build. Make sure you check them out, linked in the description below, because they do have some cool stuff. So if you want to see how the original PC build for this PC build was done, there's a video up there, and there's a GPU benchmarking video down there if that one suits your fancy more. With that being said, I'll catch you in the next one. Have a good rest of your day.